The ink on his annulment papers had barely dried when Russell Jr. met Barbara Ann. She was unlike any woman he had ever known. Educated, sophisticated, and exuding a quiet confidence, Barbara Ann stood in stark contrast to the girl he had been forced to marry at 18. She represented everything he had always desired: elegance, independence, and a partnership rooted in choice rather than obligation. Their courtship was swift but calculated. Barbara Ann, with her sharp intellect, was as drawn to Russell Jr.'s charm and ambition as he was to her grace and refinement. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect match, a power couple destined for greatness. By the time they married in a small but glamorous ceremony, Russell Jr.'s career was on an upward trajectory. Barbara Ann, with her poise and social connections, became not just his wife, but also his partner in building the life he envisioned. Together, they projected an image of success, a shining example of Black excellence in an era still defined by systemic barriers. Over the years that followed, Barbara Ann gave birth to 3 beautiful children, and their home became a reflection of their carefully curated lives. Russell Jr., ever the provider, ensured his family lived in comfort and style at their home in Baltimore County. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. For all her sophistication, Barbara Ann was no stranger to the whispers that followed her husband. She had heard about his reputation, his affairs, and his relentless need for validation. She tolerated much of it, believing in the image of their family, if not always the reality. Still, she demanded a level of respect and accountability that Russell Jr. wasn't accustomed to. Unlike his first wife, Barbara Ann was not content to quietly endure his indiscretions. Their marriage became a dance of appearances and compromises, love and resentment. Russell Jr. adored Barbara Ann's elegance and intelligence, but he struggled with the constraints of fidelity and the pressures of balancing family life against his ambition. For her part, Barbara Ann often felt like she was managing not just her children, but her husband's ego. Despite the challenges, Barbara Ann's influence on Russell Jr. was undeniable. She brought stability to his otherwise chaotic world, grounding him in moments when his ambition threatened to consume him. But as his career reached its peak and his darker impulses began to surface, even Barbara Ann's steady hand couldn't keep him from spiraling toward his eventual downfall. Meanwhile, Russell Jr. also had to juggle his emotions regarding his father's new marriage and growing family. It sparked a mix of resentment and renewed struggles with his own identity. Having always felt the pressure of living up to his father's expectations, the idea of Russell Sr. starting over with a younger wife, Evelyn Farmer, felt like a personal rejection. It deepened the wounds from his annulled marriage to Frances, reinforcing the belief that his father had always exerted control over his life while pursuing his own happiness without regard for his sons. Evelyn, being much younger, brought an entirely different energy into the Carrington household. She was ambitious in her own way, perhaps even viewing her marriage as a strategic move. With the prospect of new children, Russell Jr. worried about his place in the family and whether his father would divert financial and emotional support to this new household, further alienating him. As Russell Sr. settled into his marriage with Evelyn and started a family, the strain between him and Russell Jr. deepened. Russell Jr. saw his father lavishing attention on his young wife and, eventually, their newborn children, something he had never experienced as a son. He watched as the once rigid and controlling figure in his life grew more relaxed, even indulgent, with his new family. This only fueled a sense of bitterness, reinforcing the idea that he had been molded simply as an heir rather than loved as a child. At family gatherings, the tension was palpable. Evelyn, keenly aware of the friction, tried to play the role of peacemaker, but her presence alone was enough to ignite Russell Jr.'s resentment. He viewed her as a usurper, someone who had taken the little emotional space he once occupied in his father's life. Worse, Evelyn, while polite, was not naive. She understood that her position as Russell Sr.'s wife secured her future, and she subtly asserted herself in family matters, much to Genevieve's silent dismay. The breaking point came when Russell Sr. announced plans to revise his will to include his new children. Russell Jr., already grappling with his own struggles for identity and autonomy, felt as though he was being erased. Fearing his father would prioritize his new family over him, he confronted Russell Sr. one evening. After a particularly tense exchange, Russell Jr. bluntly asked whether his father had ever truly seen him as a son, or merely an investment. Russell Sr., unshaken, reminded him that everything he possessed now, the prestige, the education, the career, was because of his father's influence. But Russell Jr. no longer saw it that way. He began to question whether his success was truly his own, or just another extension of his father's control.